My biggest piece of advice to any young journalist or any young writer or whatever else is remember, it's not about you.
Yeah.
It's about your reader.
Hey guys, here I'm your host Sid Patel, CEO of Beverage Trade Network. I'm here with Richard Siddle. He's the co-founder of The Buyer, editor of The Buyer, a magazine in UK which is really growing fast, which talks about the business of wine as well. So Richard, thanks for having me at your house. Why don't you give our audience a little bit about your journey and how you ended up with this role?
Yeah, it's great. No, nice to have you. Nice to have you here. I feel like I'm on some sort of daytime TV show. It's all right. It's good. It's nice to see you as well.
Super. So let's talk about your journey. How did you start it, and give us a little, our audience a little context about what you've been doing and who are you?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, who am I? Well, I suppose in the context of wine and drinks. I mean, I see myself more as a sort of business journalist. So actually, when I left university, I actually wanted to be a film director, to be honest. But I worked out how hard it was to become a film director, and then I realised actually learning to be a journalist was a lot easier. But I've always been interested in business and actually how companies work and how businesses get their product from A to B. Mm-hmm. So I've actually worked in lots of different sectors. So I've worked in mainly in grocery retail, a lot of working with major FMCG consumer goods brands. I've worked in the supermarket sector. I worked in the convenience retail sector. Spent a bit of time working in the travel industry. Mm-hmm. And each time you go into work into another sector, you have to understand the dynamics and how that industry actually works. Mm-hmm. What are the kind of pressure points in that industry? How does it actually function? So when I first came into the drinks wine sector, it was actually to edit a magazine called Harper's Wine and Spirits. Mm-hmm. Although I had covered wine and drinks before in my other retail magazines, it was mainly more the supermarket level, not at the production distribution side of it. Mm-hmm. So to be honest, I've actually become a journalist who's become a specialist in that sector.
Got it.
But I mean, I wouldn't say I'm necessarily a wine expert.
Yeah.
I'd like to see myself as being more of an expert, as it were, or a specialist in actually how to deliver business content.
Got it. Super. I mean, I'm sure I've told you before, but I'm a fan of your work, and I do respect your journalism approach, which has been consistent for all these years. For all the writers, I would really, I always tell them to have a look at your articles because it's really consistent. It has got great punchy lines. It has got those elements, right? So I really want to deep dive there.
Yeah.
On what is a good story? Like, what should it include?
Well, I think actually going back to that business element, and actually, I'm a trained journalist as well, and without sounding patronising to mm-hmm. drinks writers, lots of them are actually come into the sector because they're really interested in wine, mm-hmm. or they're really interested in spirits, and that's their passion. Whereas I'm actually more interested in the actual story, the content, and to do that, you really absolutely need to nail who your reader is.
Okay.
So when you first do any kind of journalism course, the most important person in the whole story is the person who's reading it. So your job as a journalist is to interview somebody and to talk to somebody, and all the time the objective is to what is my reader mm-hmm. going to be interested in. So obviously if you work in different industries, different sectors, what that is will change. But when it comes to business, primarily it's people ultimately need to make money, they need to be profitable, mm-hmm. they need to be efficient, they need to know how to do their job properly. And my job really is to find the stories, find the people, find the companies, find the issues that are ultimately going to help my reader who work at the day buying, selling wines and spirits, mm-hmm. how to do their job. And I think that, to be honest, is what drives me day in, day out. And actually, to be honest, a lot of the time, I'm not necessarily personally excited or personally interested necessarily in the story I'm writing, but I am excited if I know it's going to be relevant to my reader, which might sound a bit counterproductive, but whereas a lot of people might write an article because they're really into natural wine, or they really like Spanish wine, or they really love a particular region, that doesn't interest me really. It's more about, is a sommelier, is a wine merchant, is a supermarket buyer, is an importer going to find those contents and what I'm finding out interesting for their jobs.
Got it. So you try to always focus on the reader and then sort of reverse engineer the topic based on the reader, right?
Yeah, exactly. So people will come to you and they'll suggest, do you want to interview X person from Y wine company or Y spirits company? And it does frustrate me a little bit where PR companies or businesses come to you and they don't really put any effort or thought process into why would I, Richard Siddle from the buyer, be interested in writing this article as opposed to Joe Blogs or Mary Blogs working for another magazine, because we all have different purposes, we all have different readerships. And I think the drinks industry has a lot of still needs to be a lot more focused on the end reader.
True. In
the same way that it needs to be focused on the consumer. Too much of the time it's focused on what's in their house, in their glass, and how it gets there.
True.
Whereas ultimately the consumer just wants to enjoy the product, or the reader just wants to know the information they need. So that's kind of what drives and motivates me. And very kind of you to say so. And that's essentially what the bar is all about. Our tagline is connecting the premium on trade, and we want to connect drinks producers with buyers, and that's our primary goal.
Sure. I want to bring value to the editors, right? So let's say if I really, if you had a coaching session with an editor and you had 15 minutes, what sort of things you would tell him or her on how to improve and become a better editor?
Well, first I would kind of look at the publication that they're producing.
Okay.
Be it a website, be it a magazine, and
why don't we use a real case study here? Let's say the sommelierbusiness.com. It's a magazine of sommeliers.
Okay.
What approach would you take in?
Well, to be honest, what I probably would do is actually ask the editor.
Okay.
Without sounding like I'm repeating myself, is to say to them, who in your mind's eye is your reader?
All right.
And get them to explain to me.
Okay.
Who their reader is and what are the issues that they think their reader is most interested in. And from that response, I would be able to determine whether or not they're really focused in on the industry that they're serving. Now, if their answer is very much more about, we wrote this story and it got lots of hits, and we wrote this story and got very, very in depth around a particular piece of content, I would always say to an editor, your job is to sort of step back a little bit and to look at what you're doing in the round. So you're looking at the I'm sorry I'm repeating myself, but it's they need to be totally focused on the business of a sommelier. So what is it a sommelier is tasked with? What are the reasons that a sommelier is in that job? What will determine that sommelier staying in their job? How does that sommelier improve their skills? How does that sommelier ultimately make more money for the restaurant that they're working in, and ultimately make money for themselves?
Terminology or a framework which goes behind it? Like, what is it called? In a more systematic approach, if you had to say, okay, what's your menu look like? What does your content plan look like? What is a disciplined way of, let's say launching a magazine and being disciplined for 12 months?
It's a bit.
Is there a process? What I'm
there is, yeah. And actually, I jokingly said when we sat down about being on daytime TV or like a magazine type show. Lots of the really best magazines and the best newspapers, best TV shows you watch. They don't start the show with the most in your face information. Sometimes.
Got it.
They need to make your guest, I suppose, your reader or your viewer, feel comfortable with what you're doing. So if you're with a magazine, often you'll have what I call sort of like peaks and flows through it. So you'll have you might have like a detailed analysis on a particular issue. So it could be like a 3 or 4 page, really comprehensive, very very detailed investigation into a certain issue. When you finish that particular article, if you say you're talking about a magazine, you don't want to then suddenly go into another great big piece of content, because the reader kind of like is coming out of that going, right, you know. So what you might do then is have a single page little Q&A profile with somebody, or my 5 top tips on how to succeed. So the content, the next bit of content is actually more relaxed content. It's very easy to digest, and you then build up again to the next big chunky piece of content.
Got it.
So you're kind of taking your journey, a bit like a film director. You know, when you're watching a film, you know, they build the characters. They have a serious action sequence or a serious piece of plot, and then they follow that with a more relaxed. So you have time as a viewer to take on board what you've just seen, and then you kind of build up again. And that's very much a similar approach with the best magazines and best websites and best pieces of content, is managing it in a way that the person who's viewing it or reading it can best digest it. If that's doesn't sound too poncy.
Yeah, no, got it. And personally, how do you manage your day? Like, do you do your thinking at a particular hour that works for you? Do you, are you at your peak in writing at a particular hour? What does your time schedule look like?
I suppose any journalist or somebody who has to hit a deadline is actually hitting the deadline. So for me, every day, you know, we put pieces of content onto the website. So the most important thing for me is to make sure I have some really good, interesting content for the website.
But let's say I was going more on the distractions. How do you? Is there like a 2 hour where you're just not going to check your emails or phone, and your
primary focus has to be hitting that deadline. So on a website, obviously, it's every day. In a magazine, or you know, if you're producing a TV show, it might be, you know, once a week or whatever. So you've got to create content to hit a deadline. So you as a journalist have to have that discipline to be able to know you've got to hit it. And to be honest, if so suddenly, you know, you've been working all day long, you've been writing all day long, and then suddenly you get a new deadline. Your deadline is in an hour's time. It's 4 o'clock in the afternoon. You're tired, you know, and someone suddenly just gives you another deadline and say, "Can you write 1,000 words?" and I need it in an hour. Then you just got to go again.
I mean, personally,
you have that discipline to do it.
For me, it would be bad quality and execution. I know deep inside, if I'm just like, you know.
Well, no, but it's a bit like a member of a sports team, isn't it? If you're playing in a game and then you're winning and you're doing really well, and then suddenly the other team comes back and equalises or goes ahead in the game, you've suddenly got to go again. You've got to find that extra energy. And again, I think actually it comes back to the training and skills as a journalist, because you're trained and your tasks is to deliver that content for your reader.
Understood.
And it doesn't matter if it's 9 o'clock in the morning or if it's 9 o'clock at night. If that's the discipline, then it's down to you to do it. And my biggest piece of advice to any young journalist or any young writer or whatever else is, remember, it's not about you.
Yeah.
It's about your reader, and it's about the best time for them is to receive that content at 10 o'clock in the evening, then that's when you have to give it to them.
Got it.
You know, you don't do it because you want to have a nice long bath or you want to go to the pub. You know, if you want to succeed in your particular sector, you have to give people the content when they want it.
Yeah.
So obviously you've got lots of lots of analytics now that allow you to show
what time is the best to publish.
Exactly. So there's no point in publishing an article at 11 o'clock on a Sunday evening or something with it. But ultimately you have to find that energy.
Got it.
And that discipline comes from the need to hit a deadline, your training, your personal commitment to doing the very best.
I think that's the main thing. How serious you are in producing consistent quality work.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah,
I would love to know, if you were building a content team, like a writing team for your magazine, what sort of interview questions would you ask, and how would you qualify a good writer to join your team? Like, what is your interview format or questions?
In a way, I would go back perhaps to your previous question and say, you've been working all flat out all week. It's 4 o'clock on a Friday, and you get given a great scoop of a story. What do you do?
Got it.
and then see what they say. If they say, well, I need to go, I want to go at 5 o'clock, I'll leave it till Monday. They probably wouldn't say that in an interview.
Yeah, exactly. They won't say that. Yeah.
But you can sniff them out though. You want.
But are there?
You want to see that energy. You want to see that excitement. You want to see the passion, and ultimately, it's all about that desire to do the very best. And I've always said this to every journalism team I work with. That I could be quite demanding as an editor. I can be quite demanding in terms of like wanting people to do the extra interview, to ring another person to get a better quote, to get some more information. And I know sometimes people would get frustrated, perhaps like, it's every day, it's all the time. But if you want to be the best, and if you want to deliver the content for your readers, then that's what you've got to do. And I think actually, to be honest, it's very notable that there are some very good journalists in the industry who, you go on a press trip and you go back to your room in the evening and you might have like an hour before you go out at night time. The ones who go and the ones who go for a sauna, the ones who go and sit by the pool for an hour, and the ones who literally go back to the room, write the content or make the notes or get the information out, because ultimately you are there to produce content. You're not there to go for a nice swim.
For the writers, for the interview, coming back on that, right? But still, there would be like 3 or 4 questions you would ask, like this, as far as the tactical questions, like how much time does it take to write a 1,000-word article? I know I may sound not literate enough to ask those questions, but what are this kind of questions to at least have a checkpoint that okay, you've asked this 10 questions?
Yeah, I might do it more around giving somebody an example of a story and say, you're going in to interview the chief executive of a major wine importer or a major wine producer. What are the kind of questions that you would ask them? So you'd ask them to
come up with the question. So the thinking process as well.
Yeah, so you can then get an idea of what kind of things that they, or you say, how would you go about researching, or how would you go about preparing yourself for that interview? So a lot of the time you're actually putting the employee or the journalist on the spot to ask them how, because a lot of time when you're writing and you're thinking and you a lot of it's all internalized. You can't actually see what someone's thinking. So you've got to try and get that out of somebody. And a lot of time in journalism, people will talk about having a really strong news sense. And by that it means that they have an ability to be able to cut to the core. And another thing actually could be, it could be like the company results are coming out for Tesco or Sainsbury's, and it can be really complicated. 30, 40 pages of financial analysis. What are the tricks, or how would you go about working out what is the key story from that result?
That's an interesting thing.
And there are certain things that you look for in results.
I've noticed approach and fishing and recruiting your stakeholders for the interview is becoming a challenge. But then you have this great tool called LinkedIn, right, and many other tools like that. So how do you? What kind of things would you know that they are a good hunter? Like they just can get the job done. Like you just have to tell them, okay, interview the buyer of Tesco. But the problem is, do you know that this person have the ability to find themselves that buyer and interview versus the other person who needs an introduction?
Yeah, well, I guess a lot of these things are a little bit of gut instinct as well. I mean, most people who are coming to you hopefully will have a CV and they'll have previous cuttings from.
Do you see previous networks or their network strength?
Yeah, well, you'd be able to see, how did you get this interview?
Got it.
What was how did you go about talking to this person? How did you set it up? To be honest, a lot of the time with networks, it's not always that relevant if they're coming from another sector, because they're obviously they've got to learn when they join your sector. My approach again will come back to, for example, in wine. If I'm working for a business magazine in wine, the most important people to know are the buyers, are the people in the importers, are the people in the distributors, are some of the leading wine merchants, the people actually at the nitty-gritty end. They're not the wine commentators, the wine critics. They're not they're not like chateau owners of Bordeaux wineries, or they're not necessarily the head of an appellation in Burgundy, or the people who sell the nicest wines.
Got it.
And I have worked with so-called journalists in other on some titles whereby if they go to a wine tasting, a trade wine tasting, and they'll come back and they would have tasted 30, 40 amazing wines, and they'll be really excited about the wines they tasted.
Yeah.
But I'll say, did you talk to the chief executive about their strategy going forward? Did you talk to the leading buyer about how they chose those wines to be there?
Yeah.
Or did you just go and taste the wines? And the ones who just go and taste the wines wouldn't be relevant for my kind of journalism I do.
Got it.
It might be relevant for that.
It's a good point. You would ask questions around the business, and you would try to dig if they've done.
Yeah.
If their approach is like that.
Yeah. If you've got 50 wines there, why have they chosen those 50 wines? How did they go about selecting those 50 wines? Why are those producers?
Got it.
I mean, there are lots of wine sites where the focus is on just the wines.
Got it.
And the people who are reading those sites are people who are just literally wanting information on the wines. I'm not discounting that completely. I'm just saying for a business magazine, you need to know the why it's there or what it's doing there, not just the fact it's there and tastes nice.
True. What's the speed part of it? Like, is there a minimum quantity you expect? Maybe something like 2 articles of 1,000 words per day, or what is the benchmark of our industry, like B2B? Writer minimum expectations. I completely understand it depends on the quality, but still there must be a minimum performance benchmark.
Yeah, I mean basically you need to be able to work at a pace to hit a deadline. So most business magazines, you'd be expecting someone to be able to write a couple of news stories in an hour, and they could be 300 words long. 300,
okay.
Well, that'd be two separate news stories, which they have to start from scratch and produce, or that might be a bit harsh actually. It might be one news story like that in an hour. A proper journalist, a good journalist, should be able to churn out or write. Should be able to write, a good 1,000, 2,000 word feature and do that in half a day, 3/4 of a day, really.
Wow, nice.
I mean, a lot less.
I'm sure a
lot less time if you're up against a deadline. I used to get frustrated if somebody took a day off. Not a day off, sorry. They said, I'm going to work from home for a day to write a feature. And then they came back the next time to the office and say they hadn't finished it. It'd be like going, well, you can, if you put your mind to it, you can do it. But I mean, obviously, if you're working on a national newspaper, you might be asked to do 5, 6, 7 stories a day.
Wow.
Or you might literally start in the morning, 10 o'clock, come up with an idea for a 1,000-word feature and have it written by 2 o'clock in the afternoon. There's a lot of different disciplines on different titles you work on. But again, it's a bit like having an athlete or a you need to have the natural fitness or the natural capability to be able to up or lower your rate of work depending on what you have, and you need to be able to understand how to use those skills in a way that's going to maximize your output, and don't get bogged down in detail, don't get bogged down in have I crafted the perfect sentence. Sometimes it's all about again, a lot of journalism, we come back to is the who, the what, the how, the why and the when, and providing you've answered those five things in the first paragraph or 2 paragraphs, then you've kind of nailed it.
Sorry, can you repeat that again?
It's the who, the who, the why, the what, the how, and the when.
Nice.
They're the 5 who, what, how, why, when. It's kind of what every journalist kind of has as their mantra.
Got it.
So if you think about every news story you read, if you actually look at the first paragraph, they'll have the answer to, or the first 2 paragraphs, you'd have the answers to those. Which is why, actually, to be fair, the journalists who work on the tabloid newspapers, they can nail that in less than 30, 40 words.
So Richard, great tips there. We want to go into the marketing side of things, right? Personally, what I've been doing with our sometimes stories is really being native to the platform. So like if this story we know would work great on LinkedIn, or a header or that picture would be doing on LinkedIn, because the objective is purely LinkedIn impressions. Sometimes, the objective is different than the reader, which your objective is, and most of the marketing objectives are usually different than, it's usually getting consumers to the winery's website and selling wine, right? So what advice would you give in creating a good, let's say, content that would do good on LinkedIn versus something, an example, would do great on Instagram, but they both are on the websites. It's just when you distribute it, you think that will get good traction.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, whether you're looking at engagement rates or impressions, you're still wanting to attract that target reader again, aren't you? So again, it is coming back to that same point. That,
True.
You know, if you're LinkedIn,
because the reader is just on that platform too.
Yeah, you're still the LinkedIn impressions. You know, if you get a good connection with on your LinkedIn, it means that you've really hit the mark with your potential audience on LinkedIn. I think LinkedIn people want to be respected and they want to be spoken to in a way that respects their business acumen. So they don't want a kind of a Facebook style, hi guys, how you doing? I went down to, and here's my article on this approach. You want a more of a factual, you know, we've all heard a lot about the metaverse.
Yeah.
You know, here we talk to so-and-so who really gives you, 5 great tips on how to understand the opportunities for the metaverse type approach. Well, I suppose on Instagram it might be more. You might go more of a chatty way and have an image that, to say, illustrates the metaverse. It could be like some sort of, visual from a video game or something or other, and it could be, something on the lines of, you may not know this person, you may not know this image, but this image is worth N million pounds in the metaverse.
Got it.
Type thing. So you're kind of like trying to capture someone's attention with the image, but also your opening line has to be the hook. So on LinkedIn, that line needs to be more
factual and
more factual, more respectful, and then on Instagram, Facebook, it needs to be what you might start a TV show with. Hi, in your face, bang.
Got it. I think what I'm personally starting to understand that this is a whole game of brand building now, like long-term brand building, even if it's a media asset, right? And you got to start adding little elements like logo on your LinkedIn image or whatever it is, right? Of a media asset, because ultimately, the way people are consuming content is really not like coming to your website and then reading and then coming to the last word, because that's what we have been measuring, like bounce rate and views on the blog. So how do you know that you're doing good? Let's say.
Yeah, it's a very, very good point actually. I mean, yeah, in an ideal world, you like the idea of everybody reading from the beginning right down to the last word, but I think what you have to remember as a journalist or as a writer or as a publisher, people aren't consuming content in the way that they used to. So yes, even if you get the magazine through your door, you still got to get them to actually open it up and actually spend the time reading it. And if you're producing content online, you can't ever expect someone's literally in the morning going to type in the buyer and go onto your website to think, oh, what has Richard written today? It's all about pushing that content under the noses of the most appropriate reader. So we spend a lot of time doing our SEO, tagging stories, and doing a lot of work in our content management system. So if someone typed in a search, so they're interested in a certain topic, so it could be, I don't know, impact of supply chain on UK wine industry or whatever. If we've written an article about that, then our story is likely to be very high on Google. So we get a lot of organic search. So I mean, a lot of our traffic to our website is coming internationally. It's coming from America, it's coming from South America, it's coming from all around the world. But a lot of that is people tagging in a certain issue.
Yeah.
Harvest in France or Chablis, or and they'll find an article that we've written.
God.
So there's that aspect to it. Then I think there's the social media content. So as a journalist, you really need to understand how to write an effective tweet or how to write an effective LinkedIn post. So you need to put as much information as you possibly can in those 144 characters or however many it is, to make sure that people actually can take the real the who, the what, the how, the when
in that thing,
in that tweet.
Yeah.
So yeah, ideally they click on it and then spend the next 2 minutes reading your article.
Yeah.
But actually, even if they just read your tweet or like it or engage with your tweet, you've done at least half your job, or you've done part of your job. So you've got that content out there. You've got it under the noses of the right people. Obviously, you can tag people in and
give us a good example of teasers, right? Where I mean, your words is your tool, right? Like so, you have. I'm sure like you are the best person to give that advice. Like what are some good teasers, a hook where I can say da-da-da and then click for more information in a simple word. But what are good ways to tell them to do this?
I think one big thing would be not to tease too much.
Okay.
So don't like say, we talk to X person and we can announce there's a major reveal. Click here to find out what it is.
Got it.
I think that that's just going to annoy people. So I think you literally have to like stick it all up front. You got to like say, so and so boss says, last year was a living hell. We're bouncing back from a living hell or something.
Got it.
Find out more. You got to
give, but still find out more, sort of thing.
Yeah, you got to serve up the main dinner in the tweet. Don't do the kind of. I mean, obviously on a magazine cover.
Yeah.
You might say, why is so and so angry, or why is so and so happy?
Yeah. What are the good characteristics of a good title? Like, how would you come up with nice titles?
Well, again, online, you can't be too clever because SEO won't like it. So you can't really do play on words, or you can't do, you can't use a sort of a Shakespearean quote in a headline because Google doesn't understand it. So you got to be quite clear and simple in what you're doing online. Obviously, in a magazine, you can be a lot more creative and use a lot more.
Got it.
Phrases and turns of phrase. So again, it's just remembering what kind of content you've got.
But is there some basic principles like four words is better instead of 20 words?
Well, I mean, actually, to be honest, I mean, most headline, if you've got like a 2-deck headline of a certain size, it actually looks visually. If you can write a headline that fills up most of that 2-deck,
got it.
Then it just looks nice.
Yeah,
it looks clean. It looks like you really spent your time working on it to make it.
Yeah.
If you just have a 2-deck headline that literally just has like one word on the second line and then a massive load of white space, it looks lazy. It looks like you haven't really bothered thinking about it.
True.
So do you mean I mean, you as a reader, as a user, probably don't think of all that in your head, but you instantaneously do. You kind of think, oh, that looks a bit crap, and you're less likely to click on it because you think the person hasn't spent. So you need to be very make sure it looks clean, make sure it has effective, make sure you're using words that everyone understands. Don't try and be too clever.
Okay.
And I think actually, again, if you're doing mailers and sending out newsletters, your subject bar on your email is massively important. So if you just put press release or newsletter, the chances of people opening it massively reduce. Whereas if you actually put, the golden nugget of what it is you're talking about, put it in your subject bar.
Yeah. Does
tell
anything
people
like
what it is.
Name of the business or name of the person work usually? If it's
just literally just what it is, because. In fact, actually, that trick, I once was sitting I was being interviewed on BBC Radio once, and I was sitting next to a producer, and he had his emails coming in, and I was doing a series of interviews with different radio stations. So as we were waiting for the next interview coming in, I was just watching him, and he literally was just deleting virtually 90% of the emails without ever opening them. And I said, isn't that a bit harsh on the person who sent you the email? What? Because you don't even know what's in it.
Yeah.
And he goes, well, if they don't tell me what's in it in the subject bar, I've got 1,000 to read. I don't have time.
Yeah.
So the ones they read are the ones that says,
that's a good point,
Heidi wins the best in class in a dog show or something. Or don't just put dog show results.
Yeah.
Put 6 foot. I don't know, just to be absolutely clear what it is that you're selling.
Yeah.
And put that in the subject bar. And I mean, you do that in any kind of business, but it's massively important. And if you just think about your own email, how you go through your own email, If you just got lots of email that just literally just says,
Yeah.
Newsletter, sale, discount.
Yeah. And let's go on the first paragraph, and then the body, and then the closing of the article. Any tips for the writers, please, there?
Well, again, it's going back to what I said earlier about that, the who, what, the how.
And you want to throw that in the first paragraph?
Well, if you're writing a news story, so if you're doing a news story as in what actually, Tesco has today released its figures, Tesco announces slump in figures on back of supply chain, COVID, outbreak, whatever. You get that in, you put all that information in the top to top.
Okay.
And then you can then start building that content through. And then obviously second or third paragraph, you need to quantify that, qualify it, potentially with a quote from the chief executive about what it is that caused those results. And then as you go through the story, the idea is you put the most important information at the top, and then it goes down in descending order. So there's no point, if you've got a really great quote, it's not like a whodunit book. You don't reveal the murderer in the last sentence.
Yeah. You
don't put your best information right down the end, because the chances are you lose readers all the way down.
Yeah.
Because as they find out everything they need to know, then you lose your readers, and then potentially.
Got it.
So the last line should be the least important.
Uh-huh.
And how that works in newspapers is if you're working on a sub-editor on a desk and they have the pages in front of them, they literally just cut from the bottom. So say they need to put another story down the bottom, and then so they need to cut this story down by half. They literally just cut it in half.
Understood.
And they put another story in. So you should be able to written your story so that they just cut it there. It's not like you've then got all this other content down below that really needed to be in.
Like if I had to write 10 tips for sommeliers on upselling wine, for example.
Yeah.
You think that first one should be the most
important,
powerful
yeah,
one?
the most.
Okay.
How to make money.
Okay.
How to, whatever if you talk to Ronan Saburn at Pall Mall, whatever he says is the most important thing a sommelier needs to know, that has to be number one. Don't have that as number 10, thinking like you're doing a kind of a 10 to 1, 10 is, it's not like watching the TV where people are committed to watch the top 10 show.
You got it.
You've got to get the number one in first, and then the 10th could be,
Understood. Any closing remarks or any tips for the writers on how, where they can learn, how they can become a better writer, especially in our wine business and drinks business?
Yeah, well, I would say don't necessarily always look at your own industry. Look at what you like reading. What is it that you get most interested in? If you're going on a long haul plane, what magazine do you pick up to read yourself?
Okay.
Is it it could be a magazine about movies, or it could be a magazine about the economics or whatever. And look at some of the writers in there and how they produce their content. Look at most journalists should have other journalists in other sectors that they admire.
Got it.
And also, to be honest, actually just look at the news, watch the news, and see how they package the story.
You mean the visual news?
Visual news, yeah.
Interesting. Okay.
Currently, obviously, the horrible situation going on at the moment. Look at how people are telling quite a complicated story in very visual terms, and there are consistent journalists who worked at the major networks, the BBC, the CNNs.
Any biographies or any books you would recommend?
Andrew Marr wrote a very good book about journalism. He's a BBC news presenter.
Okay.
John Simpson, who's also another BBC war correspondent, he's written books about being a journalist and what it takes to be a good journalist. I think the best thing as well, another piece of advice, is you never crack it. Steven Spielberg, I think, once said that he still hasn't made his best film. The most successful film director of all time, still feels like he's learning. Still feels like he's got more to find out.
Yeah. And
I think all the time, I'm learning all the time from other people, how they write, how they craft a sentence, how they pull content together.
Got it.
Sometimes you have a most incredibly complicated story where you've got like 10, 12 interviews and you've got all this facts and information, and it's a bit like walking into a big woodland, and it's like you can't see the wood for the trees.
Yeah.
And going back to some of these basic journalism skills, like what is the most important thing that my reader needs to know?
Yeah.
How do I get, say, the first 5 key facts? Take those 5 facts out, put them in bullet points up at the top. How do I then present that in a way that's going to get people, to empathise with it? So perhaps use a quote, use a really strong quote that someone had used and put that in the story high up. And then once you've got a few, it's almost like doing a jigsaw. Once you've got bits and pieces, it all starts coming together. And I think sometimes people start writing, and they haven't kind of like managed to get them head out of the undergrowth, as it were, and actually sort of see and go back to your basic skills of storytelling and telling your reader. And if you keep on doing that all the time and take yourself out of the story, it's not about you, it's not about your ego, it's not about how great people are going to say your story is. It's about how effective it is for your publication and for the person who's reading it. And again, I think that's just keep on saying that to yourself all the time. And that's what I do. I'm going to say that to myself at least 3 or 4 times a day. It's not about you. It's not about what you think. It's not about how you're feeling. It's about how effective it is for the person you want to read it.